Welcome to my unnecessarily cinematic studio setup. We're gonna start with something that I don't really hear mentioned that often in these kind of videos, and that's probably because this is not something that is absolutely necessary, but it's something that I've been using for the past year or so, and it's helped me become much better at composing my videos to be more cinematic. And that feature is LUT previews, either with a monitor or a camera that has this feature built in. Now let me explain. First of all, what are LUT previews? Well, when you're shooting log, it makes shooting kind of boring when you're looking at this washed out colors, and it makes exposure a little bit more difficult, especially if you're shooting in an environment that has low light, and it's very important to nail that exposure. So without LUT previews, you would be looking at the camera meters and all kinds of different readings that your camera or your meter gives you. Now, with LUT previews, you get to preview what the footage would look like once you're converted it to, not log, but you're still shooting log. So you're getting the best of both worlds. You could either use a standard LUT that converts your footage just to normal Rec 709, or you could use a more stylized look to get a color-graded preview of the stuff that you're shooting, and that is really my preferred way to shoot. And when you're doing this, it just makes composition a lot easier. It makes it so much easier to be inspired, and it makes it so much easier to shoot cinematic footage. Now, a monitor is even better because it gives you a bigger screen, but it does come with the trade-off of being quite heavy, and then it's not very stealthy. It makes it very obvious that you're doing more of a professional video at times. So a camera with the LUT previews built in is the most convenient option, and that's one of the main reasons I got myself a Sony FX3, and I've been super happy with this setup. Okay, moving on. Second method to make any video more cinematic is to use vintage lenses. Currently, I'm shooting this studio setup here with the Helios 44M. Recently, I've been quite obsessed with this lens. It is awesome. I really like the way that it looks. It is probably the most famous vintage lens, but it still only costs $60 plus $20 for the adapter. And it's been used in some really famous Hollywood productions such as The Batman. So instead of buying an expensive G Master lens or whatever and putting a Pro Mist filter to emulate a more film look, you could just get a vintage lens for $80 total with the adapter included, or even cheaper. There's many options. And the only real downside there is that it doesn't have autofocus, but especially when you're shooting video, having character is, in my opinion, a lot more important than just sharpness. And sharpness is often quite overrated and sometimes not even desirable, depending on what kind of a look you're going for. I also got a bunch of Pentax lenses that I haven't adapted yet, but I'll play around with soon. And I've been looking at the Vivitar 28mm. Like I said, there's so many options, and I'm really looking forward to exploring those more, because I'm really obsessed with this lens at the moment. You might have noticed that I've been using these kind of angles a lot more recently. This effect is very easily achieved with a clamp. So you just clamp your camera into a moving object, or put it somewhere, and then it can create kind of a unique angle. And when you combine this with other kind of shots, it really helps elevate your video to be a little bit more cinematic and to stand out a lot more. I wish I got this clamp a lot sooner. I only got it a couple of weeks ago. So even though I was aware of these kind of shots, I never really did them. But again, it's very cheap to get a clamp, depending on the quality anyways, and gives you so much creative options that I'm having a lot of fun with this recently. Perhaps I should quickly mention my other accessories that I'm using in this video, like this LED RGB light that I got off of Amazon like 7 years ago, and this smoke machine that I used in some of the example shots. Now the fourth tip is probably going to be obvious to some, and then not as obvious to others. I have been guilty of having horrible sound in my YouTube especially, and that's really hindered my progress, especially in the beginning. Maybe because I started as a photographer, all I ever cared about, especially in the beginning, was the way that my pictures and my video as extension would look. I would totally ignore sound. I've made some of the worst sound mistakes on this YouTube channel. And it's not really until I made my first short film that I was forced to take sound design more seriously. Just having decent sound design can really elevate any video to be a lot more cinematic almost immediately. I don't like to record sound usually in person because I like a really light setup, so I don't mic it up. Especially if I'm shooting in the rain or something, a mic just kind of gets in the way. So often I add the corresponding effects in post. That way you get the highest quality effects anyway, just adds an extra layer of work. I get these effects from various sources, including Artlist, or some of them, if they're like very specific, I take this mic and I record it myself the old-fashioned way. I did contact Artlist to give me an affiliate link since I've been using them. So if you want to sign up, you get 2 extra months free if you sign up through my link. It is in the bio, of course. It's not sponsored or anything, just a service that I use. And the last tip, and again, this is more of a philosophical thing, but that is to actually write some sort of scripts or at least storyboard or plan a little bit more when you're shooting. I think again, because I started as a photographer, often I would just show up and shoot stuff that looked good, but then I had no real purpose that I was shooting it. So then in the editing, it would take me ages just to find any kind of a coherent direction. And even then, the video just kind of often, maybe it looked good, but it really had no real point. And I'm still guilty of doing this. But it's only until I made a couple of films that I realized how much of a difference just planning a shoot can make. Now, it doesn't have to be a feature film in the beginning or even a short film. I would say that it's actually better to make the script or the plan just very simple. But just like a very simple concept or a very simple opening shot and an ending shot, and just making sure that whatever you're shooting is consistent or it has some sort of a narrative, some sort of a tiny little story, makes a huge difference in the end. So it's better to start thinking like a filmmaker a lot sooner. If you're someone like me who came from maybe a photography background and hasn't really thought about this kind of stuff, it makes, like I said, a huge difference. So for example, if you're making a travel video, a travel vlog, instead of just packing your camera and shooting everything, shooting those plane wings and waterfalls in Bali or whatever, instead of that, think, is there a story that I want to tell with this video? Or is there perhaps something that I'm looking for to get out of this trip? Or maybe even, what are the different type of shots that I need to make a video that is more clear to follow, and then just focus on shooting those. And you'll thank yourself later when you're editing it together. And then people who watch it will hopefully be a lot more interested, and they can actually follow something that doesn't only look good, but also has a little bit of a point. Likewise, if you're shooting something with a model, for a long time I was guilty of just kind of showing up and taking a bunch of different shots that would look good, but then there was no real narrative. And when you're a photographer, that is kind of fine. But when you're trying to make videos, then it would be better if there was some sort of a narrative there. Because, even for myself, I really like stuff that looks good. And often I'll watch a YouTube video that is like cinematic something, and I make these kind of videos. I've made a lot of them myself. But if there's no narrative, I'll probably watch like 1 minute and then give up. You need some sort of a story, ideally, to really hook the audience, to engage them, and to, again, give yourself a lot more direction. So recently I've been playing around with the idea of making just 1 minute short films out of these shoots with models, instead of just only shooting stuff that looks good. Admittedly, I'm only in the beginning phases of this, but it's adding a lot to my filmmaking and making the stuff a lot more cinematic, because at the end of the day, cinema is about storytelling and not just stuff that looks good. And by that note, I would also really recommend, if you're somebody who's interested in making videos, just make your first short film, because that process will teach you so much. It'll force you to go through all these different lessons and so much more.